Hi, I'm Bex. This is my face. Welcome back to my channel. Today's video is going to be a little more laid back. I want to dive into the medium I'm most comfortable with, and that is creating on my iPad. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of illustrations from start to finish, my entire process from sketch to finished illustration, and I thought that would be a lot of fun today. All right, so I've got my Procreate app open. I'm going to make a new canvas. I usually always do 3,000 pixels by 3,000 pixels. I like everything to be in a square. That just makes it easier for me to share like on social media and Instagram and stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get my reference picture.
You gotta have a reference.
So what I do is I pick what I want to draw that day, whatever item it is. And then a lot of times I'll just hop on Amazon, find a product picture, and then that's what I'll draw. For the sketch, I'm going to go in just with a light gray and just start blocking out basic shapes. So this sketch is going to be really rough. I'm not looking for any kind of detail. I just want to have an idea of where my shapes are, make sure my proportions are right, and I'll go in and refine everything later. So this is just going to be really loose. I'm not trying too hard. There's just really no pressure at this step. So once I have that basic sketch done, I'll go in, I'll set the opacity of that layer really low, and then I'll create a new layer to do a more refined sketch over top. So this sketch, I'm gonna make sure my lines are perfectly straight. If I have any like circles, I want to make sure they are perfect circles. If I have squares, I want to make sure they are perfect squares. And this is just to give me a good framework and base for when I do my final lines later. When I do my final piece, I won't do perfectly straight lines because I want to keep the hand-drawn feel. But having those perfectly straight lines for my base is really going to help me out with keeping things looking realistic and sharp. For this sketch, I'm using a lot of like the auto shapes where you see I'll draw a rectangle and then it'll straighten all my lines for me, square up my angles. So I'm doing a lot of that just to make sure I have things placed exactly where I want them. I want to make sure everything is lined up exactly right. So my first sketch was just very loose, just making sure my proportions are correct and things are more or less where I want them, and then this sketch is to be more refined, making sure things are straight and lined up properly to give myself a good base for adding my final lines later. Now that my refined sketch is done, I'm going to go in, I'm going to turn off the loose sketch, I'm going to reduce the opacity of my refined sketch, open a new layer, and get started with the inking process, doing my final lines. And for this, I switch from that lighter gray color to black, and I do my final lines in that. And now again, even though I have perfectly straight lines in my refined sketch, I don't stress about keeping my lines perfectly straight when I'm doing my final illustration because I want to keep that hand-drawn feel. If I did the auto shapes and perfectly straight lines every time, it's going to lose the charm of being a hand-drawn piece. So I don't worry about my lines being perfectly straight or my circles being perfectly circular at this point. As long as I'm more or less following those guidelines, it's going to turn out looking okay and have a lot of character and charm to it. So usually when I'm doing my illustrations, because it takes a long time, probably anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours, depending on how detailed of a piece I'm doing. So most of the time I turn on a podcast or some music. Most days it's a true crime podcast, or like the creepypastas. That's what I enjoy listening to when I'm doing my illustrations. But I just kind of get in the zone and listen to something else and do an illustration. And they do take a good bit of time. And that's something I've really been trying to learn the past few months is I don't need to rush through my artwork. So the biggest lessons I've learned in the past few months is one, like obviously use a reference. Everything turns out so much better when you're using a reference. And two is to take my time, because a lot of times I want to rush through a picture. I want it to take like 10-15 minutes to do a polished illustration, and it's just not realistic, you know? So anywhere from 45 minutes to about 2 hours is usually how long it takes. So once I'm finished with my final outline, I make that layer a reference layer, and then I go in and I start filling in almost like a coloring book, just filling in spaces with color. And at this point, I'm just doing my base color. So just the overall, just flat. It's not going to look super good at this point. It's just going to basically just be filled with one flat color. And then I go in later and add shadows and highlights. Now, when I first started doing illustrations, I would go in first and do my shadows with like some cross hatching to really get that depth, so the picture could stand on its own. But the more I've been illustrating and playing around, I've been drifting away from the cross hatching to do my shading and just relying solely on the colors, and I've really been liking the way that looks. And I was very pleased making this rainbow on here that had every color except for the blue at the end. So I made kind of a bluey purpley color and added that to my palette so I can use it in other illustrations if I ever choose to. Typically what ends up happening is that teal color I have, that like bluish green, I'll just use it interchangeably for blue or green. Probably a terrible habit, but that's what I do. So I keep the same color palette for all of my illustrations. I don't like being in a box when it comes to what kinds of things that I draw and what kind of content I make. You know, one day, like today, I felt like drawing a Polaroid camera. That's what I wanted to do. And some days I might feel like drawing bananas. One day I might just literally want to draw garbage. I wanted to be able to just draw whatever I want, but have everything look like a cohesive collection. So my style remains the same of how I draw things, and my color palette remains the same. So the color palette really is what ties everything together and makes it look like a cohesive collection, even though the type of subject matter will change all of the time. So that's how I keep like my Instagram looking cohesive and everything like that. So now I'm going in with some shadows. So I just picked a layer, put it on, I put the opacity at 50%, went in, added some shadows, just wherever I see fit. So I did one layer with a lighter set of shadows, and then I'm going in now with a darker set just to really give it a little bit more definition. But typically that's what I'll do first, is I'll go in with my shadows and do all my darkest darks, and then before I go in and start doing the highlights. Now this is where it really starts coming together, adding the shine on the lens and the flash. And I really enjoyed this part. And I think these two elements is really what brings this piece together. So this was a lot of fun. So I did my first set of highlights again on 50% opacity, and now I'm going in with just a stark white and doing some more highlights. Now against this gray that the camera is, they don't stand out a lot, these highlights, but when you really back up and take in the picture as a whole, even though the highlights are subtle, it does make such a huge difference. It really does add depth to the piece. And this is where it's good to use a reference. I almost put that highlight in entirely the wrong spot, and I'm glad I had that reference pulled up so I could change the position of it, because it really does look so much better. And that's it. I'm adding a small drop shadow behind the camera, and that's the finished piece. I'm so happy with how it turned out. But yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed seeing my process and how I create my digital illustrations. And if you liked this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this, hit the subscribe button down below, and make sure you hit the bell icon so you're notified every time I post. I'm here every Monday, Thursday, and Saturday. And that's it. I'll see y'all next time. Bye.